Hey there, everyone. That sexy nerd is back again. We're continuing the Great Northern War, and I'm really enjoying it. Sorry, I barely remember what the hell we're doing next, but hey, whatever, right? I'll eventually pick it up. But obviously, it's starting to mess up. Well, yeah, actually, I do remember. What am I talking about? Yeah, Switzerland invaded Russia. Not learning the lesson. There's already been like a lot of people. Yes, this is before Napoleon. Yes, well, okay, actually, they're all right. But Napoleon and Hitler, as much as a monster as Hitler, you know, everybody's always like, "Oh, Hitler was such a genius. Oh, this, oh that." No, he didn't. You know, he wasn't. He really, really wasn't. He was a ripoff artist. Just like everybody's like saying that Trump, it was such a genius, an original, but like, no, a lot of the policies that he implemented, a lot of the crap that he pulled are things that Republicans in the United States have been doing for years, or have been trying to do for years. He just made it and presented it in a way that everybody's like, all of his base or all these people are just gonna be like, woo, it's new and original, because, you know, people are fucking stupid. So, you know, they go by, they think it's original and this and that and the other. And, you know, it all comes back, it also comes back to Hitler, because, you know, everybody's like, he was such a genius military commander. No, he was not. Because at the end of the day, all he was doing was ripping off what the Germans did in World War I. Except that, you know, he just was able to solve some of the problems. That was it. All you did was you solved some of the problems that people back in the day were too stupid to figure out. That's all it was. He wasn't a genius. He just was like, he was just using a cheat sheet. That's it. I can never, like, at least Napoleon, as much of an asshole as he was, did come up with his own stuff, did come up with his own battlefields and strategies. But then again, you know, arrogance plays into it, and he's like, I'm going to invade Russia. And that guy, as much as everybody was doing it, at least everybody had a rush. This guy was so damn arrogant. He's like, yeah, I'm going to invade Russia. I've never been to Russia. I'd never be able to do. I had no idea how it works, but, you know, I'm going to totally go down and invade Russia. And lo and behold, what happened? His entire freaking career shut down just because he invaded Russia. Same thing with Hitler. You can argue that when Hitler invaded Russia, it was the beginning of the end. I think people even say that the Battle of Stalingrad was basically the turning point of the war. And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. Because everybody always gives so much credit to America, to England and everything. But Russia was the real one who actually beat them. And again, I don't want to give credit to that animal, Stalin, but sometimes brutal methods do work. But anyway, like I said, Peter the Great finally was able to trick this guy into invading, and now basically I think he's at his mercy now. So let's not talk about it anymore. Let's just get into the episode. And remember, please smash that like button if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content, and subscribe if you think I deserve it. And let's get into it, y'all.
Hunger, snow, and fatigue had narrowed all the possibilities of this war down to one stark inevitability. Peter and Charles would meet on the field of battle to decide the fate of the Baltic world.
Okay. I love that.
Charles had brought his forces into the Ukraine. He hoped his army would be able to live off the land. More than that, though, he hoped for two great reinforcements. First, he hoped to meet with the supply train that he had opted...
Whoa. Is he going to try and invade Russia again? Oh, boy.
Not to meet up with on the retreat from the Moscow campaign. And second, he hoped to engage Ukrainian Cossacks to serve as his allies. But now Peter himself was on the field. As the supply column that had been supposed to provide relief to Charles XII turned south to meet with the main army, Peter intercepted it. The initial fighting was fierce. Again, the Swedish army was half the size of the Russian force, but despite this, for a moment, it looked as though they might shatter the Russian forces anyway. This time, though, Peter was with his army, and with him, the hardened elite Russian guard, who stood firm and anchored the wavering line.
Yeah.
The fighting turned into a brutal slog. By nightfall, neither side had made any conclusive blow. Both
awesome
sides
picture.
withdrew with the setting sun, the Russians to the nearby woods, and the Swedes to their defensive position. The Russians settled in to rest, but the Swedes stayed in battle formation, fearing another attack. As the night drew on, though, it became clear that no new attack was coming. So, rather than fight against rested and reinforced Russian troops with his exhausted army, the Swedish commander ordered a withdrawal under the cover of dark. But as they crossed the muddy ground behind them, the wagons and the artillery began to get stuck, slowing them down.
This happened to
Abandoning
Hitler.
some of their artillery and baggage, they managed to make it to the nearest town, but the bridge they needed to truly make their escape had been burnt by a Russian detachment. Seeing this, the men began to panic. But the Swedish commander made the tough choice. They would unload the wagons, carry what supplies they could, and burn the rest. Unfortunately, in these wagons was, amongst other things, the army's alcohol rations, weeks worth of it. Such a waste. So as the men began to unpack, many of them also took the opportunity to consume the liquor that they would be throwing away. Soon, the army was drunk. Men got lost in the woods. Others had to be left behind. The orderly Swedish retreat dissolved into a chaotic flight. What few men were still good for fighting were given mounts, and these few thousand troops made their escape. No supplies from this caravan would ever find their way to Charles and the Ukraine. Charles's other hope for succor was a man named Ivan Stevanovich Mazepa. Ivan had grown up the bastard son of a minor Polish noble, but as a young page in the Polish court, he had been caught
Because
in
Jon
flagrante
Snow.
with a married nobleman's wife. He had been promptly tarred and feathered, then tied to a horse. With Ivan's face firmly
I'm sorry,
been
what?
promptly tarred. He had been caught in flagrante with a married nobleman's wife. He had been promptly tarred and feathered, then tied to a horse. With Ivan's face firmly tied to the horse's rear, the horse had been sent packing, running off unguided into the wild. Everyone had expected that Ivan would die on the Ukrainian steppe, but Cossacks had found him, untied him, and gave him a home in their tribe. Valorous and ambitious, he had risen within their ranks, until, when he was 48, the tribe had unanimously elected him to lead them. For years, he had ably served Peter the Great, but secretly he had always hoped to be free of Peter, to create an independent kingdom for his Cossacks. When Charles had begun rampaging through Poland, Ivan began to negotiate with him. After all, this Swedish king might have a real shot at overthrowing the Russians. Charles never took these overtures too seriously, though, at least not until desperate circumstances forced him to. As his campaign to Moscow began to fall apart, he reconsidered the value of this Cossack hetman. He agreed that, in exchange for the 30,000 horsemen that Ivan said he had under his command, the Swedes would offer their protection to the Cossacks. It was with the intent to meet up with this force that Charles turned southward. It was for this Cossack force that he abandoned the inebriated and ill-fated resupply train that was originally meant to catch up with him. Charles needed these troops, and the sooner he could link up with them, the better.
This is awful.
But Ivan Mazepa had severely overestimated the Cossacks' loyalty to him. When he made his rebellion known, it was 3,000 Cossacks, not 30,000 that decided to follow him.
Really?
The rest maintained their allegiance to Peter. Peter then burnt Ivan's capital and sent the bodies of Cossacks tied to crosses floating down the Dnieper to discourage further rebellions. By the time Ivan struggled into Charles's camp, he had merely 1,500 men with him, and few supplies.
That's terrible.
Now cut off in the Ukraine, the situation for the Swedish army was desperate. They were using saltpeter instead of salt to preserve food. They didn't even have enough wine to give the sacrament to dying men. So Charles made a bold plan. He would attack the fortress of Poltava and gain a secure location for his men to rest and await supplies from the rest of his empire. But the privations of the winter had taken an even greater toll on his army. Almost all of his artillery had been left behind. They had almost no shot, and the powder had gotten so damp and waterlogged that men complained that when they fired they could see the balls drop to the ground 30 feet away. Wow. They had also lost much of their officer corps, and now that it was summer, gangrene was spreading through the camp. But still, they put Poltava to siege. Each
They need
day
to
they
go
tried to
home.
mine underneath the fort and use sappers to drop its walls,
They need
but
to go
without
home.
artillery the going was slow. All the while, Peter raced toward Poltava with a massive relief army.
That's terrible.
And then Charles's legendary luck finally ran out. While
Didn't already run
overseeing the
out?
siege works, a stray bullet caught him in the heel, passing straight through his foot and embedding itself near his big toe.
Oh.
That day, he rode and worked through the pain until his men noticed that he was ghastly pale. When they took him to his tent and cut off his boot, they found that his foot was a wreck. He would have to be carried on a litter for at least the remains of the campaign. Then Peter reached Poltava. His massive army of 80,000 dwarfed the 18,000-ish men of Charles's army that were actually in fighting shape. This giant force
away.
arraigned itself in
home.
front of the fort and began to dig in. Still, Charles and his commanders chose to rely upon the expedient they had always relied upon: assault. At first, things go well. Swedes overrun the forward batteries and the assault sweeps forward. But then things begin to bog down. Inopportune orders are given. The Russian line is given time to firm up. Between the men left behind to guard the camp and those ordered to maintain the siege, even while the main fight is going on, the Swedish army is down to about 4,000 men. The order is given. They are to rush the entrenched Russian line. Cannon fire rips through the line of charging men. Bullets rain down upon them. By the time they reach the Russian works, nearly half of them lay bleeding on the field.
would imagine.
The king orders his litter raced to the front to encourage his men. One by one, his litter bearers are shot dead around him, until only 3 of the original 24 remain. The king's litter drops, smashed upon the ground. What few men are left surge forward, trying to prevent the Russians from capturing their king. A major rides up, dismounts, and lifts the king onto his own horse, only to be torn to pieces by Cossack sabers moments later. The king is whisked to safety, but at what cost? The army is routed, stumbling back across the
Bye.
steppe, disorganized. They need to cross the Dnieper to escape, but the Russians are fast on their heels. The Swedes are forced to make a difficult decision. The king is sent ahead with 1,500 of the fastest combat-ready cavalry they have left. The remainder of the army is transferred to one of the king's generals. 2 days later, with the Russians closing the army's line of retreat, 14,000 of what had once been the world's finest army surrender en masse. Can the king escape? Can the Swedes recover? Join us next
Wow.
week to find out.
Okay. That was some real... He was on such a roll earlier, too, wasn't he? Man, that is almost sad, isn't it? He was, like, taking over everything. What, didn't Sweden control the world at this point? But, man, wow. You can't stand up to Peter the Great. He's named the Great for a reason. But I think we only got one episode left, so please smash that like button if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content, and subscribe if you think I deserve it. And remember, if you're going to take anything away from these videos, please don't invade Russia!